My name is Casey Paleos. I am a psychiatrist, a researcher, working in New York. Um, I was introduced to Carolyn, or to her abilities rather, uh, through an acquaintance of mine who started out as a skeptic. In fact, she's a professional skeptic. I think you know her, Kim LaCapria, was working at the time as a journalist for Snopes, which is a website. Her job was just to debunk myths and things that uh, people were claiming or putting on the internet that weren't true. And so um, the story she told me is that she went to Carolyn with the full intention of debunking her, gave a false name. As a internet journalist, she's somebody who's very protective of her online identity, and so was, assured herself that you know, no details about her private life could be found by anyone. But even beyond that, she gave a false name, a false phone number, paid for the session anonymously, and basically took every precaution you could imagine to throw Carolyn off the scent and make it effectively impossible for her to do any preliminary research prior to the reading that Kim hired her to do, fully expecting that she was just going to get a bunch of, vague gibberish in return. But what Kim told me is that her mind was absolutely blown by the reading. Is a pseudo-skeptic, and there's a lot of pseudo-skeptics out there that calling themselves skeptics that aren't really,
Right.
they're cynics. And I agree with you. That's a very important distinction. And as a scientist, it's really important to me for us, for in my profession, to be embodying true skepticism, and it doesn't happen as often as I would like, particularly around these types of experiences that really force us to question the paradigm that we're living in. It's an extraordinary claim for somebody to say that they can speak to people who have crossed over, who are no longer in a physical body. It's an extraordinary claim for somebody to be capable of remote viewing, to be capable of the medical intuition and medical psychic abilities that Carolyn has. All of these things are extraordinary claims, and so they require extraordinary evidence, right? So it's not unreasonable to want the evidence, but it is unreasonable to just, once you have the evidence, to just say, well, move the goalposts and say, well, that's not good enough. I need more, or I need something else, or this evidence isn't actually real. At that point, you're just looking to confirm a bias, and that's not science, and it's not skepticism.
So Kim told you about Carolyn, and what was your interest in this whole field? Why was Kim telling you about it?
Um, I just sort of came up in conversation. It
Hmm.
wasn't probing for it. It's just something that she brought up to me.
Hmm.
But when she did bring it up, I mean, I'm somebody who has been open-minded about this stuff. Again, as a scientist, I'm somebody who lets the world sort of tell me what's true rather than, I mean, we all have to sort of walk around with our assumptions and our maps of the territory, but I'm somebody who understands that the map is not the territory. And
Hmm.
so I have a map, but it's always open to revision. If there are things in my experience that uh, require me to revise the map, I will do that. Otherwise, you're just stuck in the map. So, I've been open-minded about this stuff. And prior to meeting Carolyn, had learned enough about it to convince myself that not everything that people say in this arena is a hoax or false or looking for attention or looking to, con people. I'm sure there's some of that stuff going on, but there's also, I was already somebody who was open to the idea that these are true experiences for at least some people. And so I got curious when Kim told me about her, and my wife, my late wife, uh, who passed away in December of 2022. This was back in 2018. She was suffering from a very severe chronic illness, and we were having lots of trouble. She had seen hundreds of doctors and getting all types of conflicting advice over the years, oftentimes recommendations that would only make things worse. And we were really kind of at sea. And she was one of these patients that was just so complex and it was suffering from something so poorly understood and rare that doctors would sort of throw up their hands. And for a long time, she was sort of blamed for the doctor's ignorance and told that this is all in her head, this is all psychological, until we got genetic testing, really just right around the time actually we met Carolyn, this is around 2018 as well,
Mhm.
that we got our whole genome sequenced, and there were very, very clear abnormalities, mutations that she was born with that made sense of a lot of things in hindsight, that sort of validated and vindicated Dana's reality, which was great. But at that time, so much damage had been done, and she was in such poor shape that, we needed help outside of the conventional Western medical system, and medical intuition is the thing that sometimes helps people. So I was curious to see if maybe Carolyn could help in that respect, because I had learned that she was a medical intuitive, uh, in addition to being a medium, although I think with her, knowing how her process works, those things are very, very interconnected. But and so I booked a reading on behalf of my wife and also on behalf of myself because I was curious and I kind of wanted to see for myself. I mean, I believed Kim's testimony; she was very credible, but I wanted to see for myself as well
Sure.
what Carolyn could do. And so I booked a reading for myself, and with the intention of connecting with a particular person in my life who had passed and years before. And that person did come through pretty strongly. So, the details, and I told nothing to Carolyn, and her process is very much to insist that you tell her nothing, because anything you tell her is going to get into sort of her ego. And I think her ego can get in the way of her really sort of becoming the open channel that she needs to be to bring this information from wherever it is that it's coming from, to our plane. But so what came through was a teenager that had died in his teenage years, who had committed suicide. Uh, she identified the method of his suicide. She identified the fact that he was estranged from his father, that his mother was a severe alcoholic, that had one younger sister, that he and I were best friends, that we were actually blood brothers, which we were. We did the silly teenage boy thing of like cutting our hands and putting our blood together and deciding we were blood brothers after that, which we were.
Mhm.
She named very specific nuanced details about my sort of interpersonal dynamic with him, what was going on with him around the time that he committed suicide. She named a particular piece of clothing that he often wore, described it in detail, and also identified the item that I placed into his coffin at his wake, which nobody else saw except for me and apparently him. Didn't know at the time
Wow.
that he was watching over me, but he saw what had happened and was able to relate it to her.
Wow.
So,
So, how did you feel after that first reading with Carolyn?
I mean, just grateful, just really, again, it wasn't like I went in feeling like, looking for a gotcha moment or some reason to disbelieve her. Um,
Hmm.
I was just really grateful for my friend who came through, and for her ability to bring him through, and for her ability to make that connection between us, and uh, bridge the gap that most of us aren't capable of bridging between this world and the other world, or the next world, as she calls it. Um,
Hmm.
you know, I was just really grateful to have had the opportunity to hang out with him again for a little while. He was making jokes, like, he made some really funny jokes that were very much his sense of humor in the reading.
Hmm.
Um, and I was just grateful to be spending some more time with him. I mean, in hindsight, I recognize now how present he has been. And since my wife passed away in 2022, um, she has also been very present. But when she went into hospice, this was it was sort of an expected thing. She didn't die suddenly or unexpectedly, so we had some time to prepare about it, and we talked a lot about what our relationship could potentially be like after she crossed the veil. And it's in some ways totally exceeded my expectations. It's confusing and difficult because it's not the same as when they're in a body, but her presence in my life is very real. And my friend's presence in my life was also very real, but I didn't recognize the signs for the many years. He died in 1992, and this was
Right.
2018. So, many years had passed. And I had kind of inklings occasionally, like, well, is that him? Maybe not. But having had this confirmation, there was actually, this doesn't really have much to do with Carolyn, but just to give an anecdote from my own experience, aside from the mediumistic readings, on so my wife and I, when we first met back in 2013 or 2014, is when I went out to visit her for the first time. The dates aren't really important, but in October of 2014, I was visiting her in LA. I was living in New York, and we were in her bedroom just hanging out. It was like a little bit before I needed to head off to the airport, and I'd given her a locket as a present on that trip, and she had just hung it on a little uh, night like a night table kind of lamp that was at the side of her bed. And we at some point, one of us noticed that it was just swinging back and forth, like not just like subtle, like very
Hmm.
probably like tracing up an arc of like 6 inches, like really swinging. And for like minutes and minutes on end, I took a video of it on my phone, which I still have to this day. And we were both totally flummoxed by it. And it was just so anomalous and weird. And we told her dad about it, and her dad was, obviously you're going to look for other explanations for something really anomalous like that. And he's like, well, it's LA. There's earthquakes that happen all the time. And so I actually went and looked at the seismograph, the state, I don't know what agency does this, but there's a government agency that tracks all the earthquake activity in a region all the time, and that's publicly accessible information. So I downloaded the seismic activity right around the day before, that day, and the day after, and there was nothing at the time that this was happening, not even on that day. So could not have been an earthquake. There was just no other explanation for it. And then I looked after the fact, I didn't even realize on this day, it was October 27th, which is the day that he killed himself.
Oh, wow.
And so what to make of that? I mean, to me, in hindsight, and then I didn't make that connection actually till years later. In hindsight, though, it's clear to me that that was him. It was him just dropping in to, I don't know, say hi, to give his seal of approval on our relationship, or who
Yeah.
knows exactly what.
Yeah.
But it's things like this where you could just dismiss that as something anomalous, as just a coincidence. I mean, that's a little hard to dismiss because there's really no good physical explanation for why it's happening, but there's plenty of experiences that you could just shrug away as a coincidence. And sometimes it's right to do that, but sometimes a coincidence is more than just a coincidence.
Hmm.
Carl Jung called them synchronicities. And when you learn to sort of read that language, it can become a way of maintaining communication with them, because there's something, I don't really pretend to understand how it works, but there's something about the randomness, the random chaos of just daily events that can serve as a kind of paint and canvas for people on the other side of the veil somehow. Like these synchronicities, when something aligns and happens, it's a way for them to get your attention, I think. I don't know how their energy is involved in it, but clearly it is, because synchronicity is a meaningful coincidence. So like something will happen and it has personal meaning, like an inside joke or an inside meaning to you and the other person on the other side of the veil. And it'll happen in a moment. Uh, and I can tell you some stories about Dana, my wife, that since she passed, that would, really knock your socks off. But, we'll just keep it focused on Carolyn. But there's just, I, I feel very blessed and fortunate because I don't need to wonder and guess
Yeah.
about there being the persistence of consciousness after death. I have as much firsthand experience that is the truth as I do that there's a sun that our planet revolves around, and that it comes up in the morning and sets at night. Like I've seen it with my own eyes. I don't need to wonder about it. And that's a true blessing, because I think the fear of death is something that drives creates a lot of problems in our culture and for us as individuals. But
Yeah, I completely agree. So after you had your reading with Carolyn, your reading, the mediumistic reading where she brought your friend through in such great detail,
yeah.
um, is that when you decided to have her to have her meet with Dana?
I mean, I'd already booked a meeting, a
Oh, you
reading.
already booked it. Okay.
I'd already booked it, but I mean, I obviously told Dana right away, like what had happened. And it just made me more confident,
Mhm.
obviously, that whatever was coming through Carolyn is something that we could use as useful information. I mean, obviously, everything needs to be assessed. For me, it's just, extra data points. It's not like everything the medium says you have to take as gospel. It's more information about a situation that isn't really obtainable through other means, but it has to be interpreted through a rational lens. And also because having known Carolyn for years and understanding her process, and also as it happens, my wife, prior to her passing, started to develop her own sort of, I think she already had or always had them, but started really cultivate and develop some of her own psychic and mediumistic abilities. I think as she got closer to her time of crossing over, for some reason that those abilities became more pronounced in her. But so
Mhm.
I've had like a sort of a front row seat to see how some of this stuff works. And what Dana and Carolyn have both described to me is information will come down as sort of like a dense like packet, almost like a zip file that we can download. And then, it comes in a very dense packet of meaning. And then that has to be unpacked and translated. They can't convey that to another person like you or me uh,
Mhm.
telepathically. So they have to translate it into words. And there are things that can get lost or mistranslated in that process of taking the dense information packet and translating into words that, a normal person can understand. Uh,
Mhm.
so, I think you also always have to take that in mind too, that there is always going to be some human filter through which this information needs to pass in order for it to be communicated. It doesn't mean it's invalid information. It just means, for me, it's always useful and important to kind of be comprehensive in terms of how you're thinking through a situation, especially, when you're talking about matters of life and death, often I was with my wife. She was again very
Right.
sick, and a lot of the
Right.
things she would be trying if they didn't work, or especially if they backfired, could have really dire consequences. And so, I mean, there's one story I can tell you that involves Carolyn that really speaks to that. So we were working with a medical provider who was a really highly specialized in medical genetics and didn't have a license to practice in New York. But because we had sort of exhausted so many of pretty much all the local options available to us here, because doctors would just fire her and just say, I can't really help you. It's out of my ability to help. We didn't give up. When we heard that, we just had to keep looking. And so we found a guy who was practicing in Montana. And I'm a physician, so I was able to sort of uh, execute some of his recommendations locally, under his guidance. Because I'm a psychiatrist. He was a medical geneticist and a mitochondrial expert. So that's way outside of my realm of expertise. So I would just follow his instructions, and we'd uh, Dana would receive IV treatments at home through an indwelling port catheter that she had.
Mhm.
And so there was this regimen of treatment pretty early on with her meeting with Carolyn, where the basically what Carolyn was seeing was that I was putting poison in her through an IV bag, and that is what came through to Carolyn, and she didn't understand it at first because she's psychic. She had talked to me. She could see into my relationship with Dana. She knew that this is not something I would ever do.
Mhm.
Like I would never volitionally poison my wife. And so she couldn't really understand what she was um, seeing, but she had to say something about it. And so she brought it up. And long story short, it turns out that there was a component of the IV solution that he was recommending that was actually quite dangerous for her, and he had made a mistake. And when we confronted him on it, he admitted that it was actually a mistake. And had we continued to deliver that, I mean, I think it did actually have some negative effects on her, unfortunately, because we had been doing it for a couple of weeks already by that point. But had we
Mhm.
continued to do that, who knows how much more damage would have been done. But Carolyn was the one who spotted that and caught it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And once I went back to him with that information, he immediately recognized the mistake that had been made. And so, you know, explain that. I mean, there's just so many, there's hundreds of things that I could go through, and I don't even have an exhaustive list of all the
So when Dana first went to Carolyn, what was that like? What was that experience? Because Carolyn, I assume, didn't know anything about Dana's condition.
No, right. She didn't. And so I think the initial reading was mainly a medical reading. She just went through uh, a list. In fact, I have something that Dana wrote that I could read to you in her own words because
That'd be
she's
great. Yeah.
eloquent and will say it more succinctly than I can. So this is a review uh, that Dana left on Carolyn's Facebook page back in June of 2021. Um, She says, I've been to several mediums, but after my first session with Carolyn, I can't imagine going to anyone else. I have an exceedingly complex, rare series of health conditions with a 4-page symptom list. During my initial medical reading, she went through my entire body, and without allowing me to say a single word about my condition, she mentioned every item on that list with an absolute uncanny level of detail. This reading was qualitatively different and superior to anything I've known or experienced in the field of medical intuition. I was expecting to hear typical generalizations like sometimes you get headaches, who doesn't, or your aura is weak, not helpful. I was not expecting to hear you have a benign fatty tumor on top of your right kidney caused by taking too much of a specific medication that I was taking that I never mentioned. Both the kidney tumor and medication connection were confirmed by a urologist. This is just one representative example of countless details she received with this level of accuracy and specificity. Carolyn explained exactly what my rare genetic diseases were doing to me on a cellular level and the environmental factors that had exacerbated them before I even had the diagnoses on paper. She often disagreed with my doctors, and she was always the one who ended up being correct. She's played a much more valuable role in my healing than anything mainstream medicine could offer. Even my husband, who's a physician, has trusted her intuition with complex medical matters over the feedback of his own colleagues and was always vindicated in doing so. Her non-medical spiritual readings are equally mind-blowing. When she connected with my loved ones on the other side, she captured private jokes, their personalities, histories, and sense of humor. She pulled details so obscure that no one in the world could have known them, including me. For example, she described a very unique photo of my parents when they were dating that I had never seen until she brought it up, and I asked my father about it. I remember this. And so he went and got the photo. It was just in a box somewhere in the attic, and
Mhm.
put it down, and it was the exact photo that Carolyn described. It was like some silly photo where, there's like those things where they will paint like a cowboy and a horse or something on a board, and there's like a hole cut out for the faces, and like you see
Mhm.
faces, and it's like, so she described that exact thing, and that was the picture that he knew exactly what she was talking about when Dana described it, and he went and got it and showed it to her. Dana continues, I'm a natural skeptic, so I made sure Carolyn didn't have my name, personal phone number, email, or anything searchable before my reading, which is exactly what she prefers. Fair warning, you may have the urge to excitedly expand on what she's saying as you confirm the details she receives, but she will not let you give her any information whatsoever. No hints. This speaks not only to her exceptional abilities, but her deep integrity with the sacred nature of this work. Every session has been absolutely transformative, and I can confirm that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's amazing. That's incredible. I know a lot of mediums, and Carolyn is, some are good, some are okay, some are not so good, and Carolyn's just like next level.
She's in a league of her own. There's no question about that. And I'm sure you've heard, she's told the story of how this happened with her. The 11/11/11 thing, November 11th,
Right.
2011,
Right. Right.
double meningitis and near-death experience. I mean, she was already, I think, psychic before then, but this sort of blew her open. And she came back here with a purpose and a mission. And I really support her mission because I think it has a lot to do with, again, expanding our culture and our, sort of our civilization's uh, belief system. It's really
Yeah.
important.
Well, you mentioned, and I'm curious about this personally because I have several clients I work with whose spouses are on the other side. And there's this thing about the relationship with your spouse when they're on the other side. You kind of touched on that before. What's your relationship with Dana like now?
Um, it's really, um, it's beautiful. I mean, listen, there's no getting around the loss. Like she and I both lost something tremendous, our physical connection, just being in each other's physical presence, just the simple touch of, you know, her skin on mine. I mean, that's something that I'll never have again in this
Mm,
lifetime. But um, so, it's not the pain is very real, but um sort of the way I've described it is that her being, our love is sort of woven into uh a space that I've been able to create and hold open, that was caused by the wound of losing her. But um when I lost my friend when he committed suicide when we were both teenagers, that created a big wound, which kind of just scarred up and sealed over and sealed my heart off in a lot of ways and cut
mhm,
me off from deep aspects of myself, just as a survival mechanism. I didn't have any better tools or a better way of dealing with it at the time. But when Dana crossed over, obviously now I'm in a very different phase of my life than I was then, and had a lot more tools and resources and support at my disposal, and just a better understanding of myself and spirituality. And so, I committed myself to not letting that wound scar and seal over the way it did when my friend died when I was a kid. And so, that's been beautiful because there have been it's allowed me to stay open to, and here's I mean, the tragic kind of irony is that they want to communicate with us. They really do, but grief and what we believe in and what we're open to will play a big role on their ability to stay connected. And we can close ourselves off from them. I see it happen all the time in my own practice as a psychiatrist. I don't infrequently see people who've lost significant others, and
mhm,
you know, you just, and I'm not trying to push any worldview onto people either, but it's really sad to see how grief can really create this vicious cycle where the pain of the loss exacerbates the perpetuation of the loss, because there is a way that they can remain in our lives. And for me, um, I mean, on a fundamental level, it's just we were very, very close. And I mean, she and I think we're maybe probably a bit unique in so far as like, because her illness sort of kept her housebound and largely bedridden for much of our relationship. We made a practice of just spending an hour in at least in the morning, every morning, and almost every single night, just holding one another in bed, just being really, it was like this kind of meditative practice that we had where we just felt it was weird. It started happening pretty much immediately after we met each other in person. We felt this energy that would kind of just travel through us, and neither of us had an explanation for it or what it was. And it wasn't, we didn't try to do it. It wasn't something that we were expecting or trying to make happen. It just happened spontaneously. And that I guess tantric energy would flow through us anytime we were in proximity to one another. And so,
mm,
I think that did a couple things. One, I think it really sort of braided our energies together in a way. I'm not sure exactly what I mean by that, but there's some way in which I think every person that we're close to, your energy kind of blends with the other person's. But ours were very, very intricately interlinked, and so it accomplished that, and it also gave me a very distinctive felt sense of what it's like to be near her in that
mm,
way.
mhm,
So now, since she crossed over, when she was alive, I would have to get next to her physically really to feel that. Now it's like I can just tune into it in my own body. And I don't know, maybe it's just like a memory of the felt sense, but I can tap into that and then feel her presence with me all the time. Whenever I reach out to her, call out to her, I feel her presence, her energy very strongly. And then lately, over the last few months, for whatever reason, I've been smelling this very distinctive perfume that she wore every day. Will just hit me.
mm,
Particularly in the mornings. There's something about waking up in the morning, um, and you're in that kind of liminal state. I think that makes you a bit more porous. Your consciousness is maybe a little bit more porous. to the other side. I mean, personally, I believe that when we're in dreamless sleep, we are on the other side. Like it's a little death, I think, that we wake up from every morning until we don't wake up from it anymore. But um, so anyway, so I will feel her in that way. And then there's just some very, every once in a while she'll just show up in these very distinctive synchronicities that where it's clear it has the stamp of her. It's not just like something that I could like, you know, if I thought hard enough, connect back to her. It's very, very clear and detailed and distinct experiences. And I have, many pages, many pages of journal entries at this point documenting these things of
Mhm.
synchronicities that happen where it's not just something that we had in common. It's like it'll show up in ways that have her sense of humor sometimes. Um, it'll involve other people often, and other people who knew her. So we have an ongoing relationship that I'm still sort of trying to feel my way through. It's not familiar territory for me. I don't,
Sure. Yeah.
a lot of tools, I'm learning how to navigate it. But mainly it's just knowing that she's always with me. And yeah, so uh that's a real comfort to know
Yeah.
that her essence, the thing that was truly her, the thing that I fell in love with, that I'm still in love with, is still exists. It's been challenging for me in other ways though, because I'm still here, I'm still physically in this body.
Right.
Um, and I do still have, just a human need for physical companionship. I know she doesn't want me to be physically alone for the rest of my life. So lately I've been trying to navigate, what it might be like uh, to introduce intimacy with another person at some point down the line. But it would have to be somebody who's open-minded to this.
Yeah, that's a challenge. And I was listening to someone the other day. Her husband's on the other side, and they still work together. She's a medium,
Mhm.
and she was saying for her, she's not going to have a physical relationship. But she said if I were, or if people were, you have to find someone that's open to the fact that you still have that ongoing relationship with Dana, which I assume you probably always will.
Yeah.
I do want to ask you a question because you mentioned I'm not trying to push a worldview on anybody, which I appreciate. But as both a medical professional and a mental health professional, how do you think the world would be different if we accepted mediumship? If we accepted people like Carolyn, like if we went to them and said, "I want you to work with my doctor to help me with the diagnosis." If your patients, if you could say your loved one is still here with you, and let me show you why, how would
Right.
that change things?
I mean, it would profoundly change things. It would profoundly shift. I mean, first of all, I think it would just make the entire field on both sides, medical and mental health, more effective. It's somebody with Carolyn's ability, and I'm not saying that this is you can find it in every street corner. You can't. Her gift is very rare, but I don't think she's the only person in the whole world who can do what she can do. She's exceedingly talented at it. Um, but um, that doesn't mean that there aren't people who have really who are just as talented or a little bit less perhaps, but even being like half as talented as Carolyn is being tremendously talented, right?
Mhm.
Um, so uh, it's an untapped resource, and it would also uh, I think reorient us to the centrality of spirit in our world, and that is the main thing I think why it's so important because we live, as I mentioned earlier, we live in a culture in the West. I mean, there are plenty of people who are religious, but I think, and there's plenty of people who are atheists who consider, who are the way Kim started out, as total, um, or worse than Kim, because Kim, again, I think was a true skeptic, but there are a lot of people who just have a lot of cynicism and what I would call pseudo skepticism, which is just having a lot of preconceived notions and not really wanting to listen to anything that challenges those beliefs or those notions. And I think that creates a very, I think, not to get too deep into this, onto a soapbox here, but like we have a strange relationship with death and with spirit in our culture. It's like,
Mhm.
because I think personally it's because it creates a lot of discomfort for us. It's a huge mystery, and I think, as humans, as organisms, we have a fear of the unknown. And so, we want, when we're confronted with the deep mystery, when we're confronted with the unknown, um, I think it's a natural tendency to want to like find some way to get your bearings and to control it in a way. And so I think there's a lot of belief systems that come up that are more about control than they are about connectedness. So, and that to me, I think is sort of uh, what we have lost. Dana had a really beautiful way of expressing a certain problem that she and I both perceive uh, in our culture, which is that we have sacrificed mystery for mastery.
I love
And
that.
in order to have feel this false sense of mastery over things that we don't understand and that we can't control, we will dispense with the mystery and essentially either claim and pretend that it doesn't exist and dismiss it at every turn, or we will put a lot of rigid dogmatic rules around the mystery and say, if you do this, that, or the other thing, you're going to burn in hell for all of eternity, or you're going to go to heaven. But that's about control. It's about making people afraid so
Yeah.
that do what you want them to do while they're here. And that's not what the evidence shows. you
Yeah.
know,
I love what you said earlier about, you said, this is as real to me as knowing that the sun is here.
yes,
But we, in our society, we always have to kind of apologize for our worldview. I don't want to push my worldview on anybody. I don't, but I love you're a professional, you're a scientist, you're a medical professional, you're a very dogmatic person, or not dogmatic, but very, rigid thinking. Not rigid, but you're structured in your thinking.
rigorous. I would say I have a rigorous.
Rigorous. That's the word I'm looking for. Thank you. You're rigorous in your thinking and in your process. And so it's like you and I were talking earlier. I think when I met Kim, we were talking about Kim because we both happen to know her. She looked at me like, he seems to be an intelligent guy. Why does he believe this?
Right.
And so we need people like you, and I appreciate you doing this because we want to tell people this is not a dogmatic thing. This is not a religious thing. This is not a worldview. This is where
Right.
the evidence leads us.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. That's very, very excellent way of putting it.
Yeah. Well, anything else you'd like to add before we close out today?
No, thank you for doing this, for taking the time. Um, I see the photo of your lovely daughter in the background. I know Carolyn's helped you connect to her. I don't know much
Yeah.
about her, but I am curious if you or have any interest in sharing how your connection with her is experienced in your life.
With my daughter.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's funny. She
What's
passed
her,
away almost 9 years ago now,
what's her name?
and I get all kinds of signs from her.
What's her?
Um, Shayna, her name is Shayna. So I get all kinds of signs from her. She messes with my computer. She messes with my telephone.
Yeah.
I have a podcast, and she messes with the things on my podcast. So she loves to play with electronics. She was 15 when she passed, so she was into the phone and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Synchronicities, as you talked about, and synchronicities, for people who don't know, they're more than just coincidences. They're meaningful coincidences. They happen certain days, certain times, like with the pendant swinging back and forth. That might have been your friend saying, "I approve of her. This is the one for you."
Right.
She sends me, messages like that as well. And I had a reading with Carolyn. I don't even know how we met. We met on Facebook. It's just one of those things. Like, she was a friend of a friend, and Carolyn like called me up one day and said, "I'd just like to, give you a reading. I feel drawn to give you a reading." And she told me stuff that literally nobody knew. Um, a thought my wife had in the hospital the day my daughter passed. My
Wow.
wife had not shared with anybody, never spoken out loud.
Wow.
Carolyn told me, and when my wife got home, I told her, and she goes, nobody knew that. Literally,
Wow.
nobody knew that.
She hadn't even told you at that point.
No, she told
Wow.
no one.
Wow.
No one. And
That's
I
ins-
still haven't told anybody what that was to this day. So that my wife was like, this is this woman is for real.
yeah,
So
yeah,
that's been my experience with Caroline. And we've talked, many times since then, like you have over the years.
yeah,
Um, so yeah, I'm just trying to help her get this message out to people.
yeah.
I think it's very important because I'm a chemical engineer. I'm a scientific person. I'm a rational person.
You're a rigorous thinker too.
Yeah, and I don't, the idea that we have to again kind of apologize, like I don't want to force this. And I'm not forcing anything on anybody, but just look at the evidence. Go
Yeah.
to someone like Carolyn and give them a shot, like Kim did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. For sure. Maybe we'll close on this. Do you know the story of Kukule, the benzene ring? You might appreciate this as a
No,
chemical
I
engineer.
don't.
So Kukule was the guy who discovered the benzene ring
Mhm.
formation. And he had been working on this problem for a long, long time, and he couldn't figure out how, the six carbon, six hydrogen
Mhm.
structure of a benzene ring, what its physical structure was. He was working on it, and it was banging his head against the wall, could not figure it out. And the story is, and he wrote this in a journal of his that was found afterwards. He was this was on his mind all the time, and then he ended up like dozing off in front of the fire and like basically fell asleep and started having a dream, and he saw images of hydrocarbons, and they're all like snakes, these linear hydrocarbons, and then one of the snakes bit its tail and then came up to him and started running, like almost like taunting him, like just like spinning around in a circle, and he woke up and he was like, that's it.
Mm.
That's the structure. And so, not to say that that was mediumistic or anything, but just to say that we can access, there's different levels on which we as humans can access truth. And the rational, logical approach is a beautiful one, but it's not the only one. It's
Exactly.
not the only one. And you'll see this, in the stories of scientists down, down the ages. A lot of information like this will come in this really weird sort of transrational way.
Hmm.
I think the periodic table showed up to Mendeleev in a dream too. Like things, Einstein would say like he would just intuit and see the truth of something,
Yeah.
just like almost like a download packet like Carolyn gets, and then would have to do the math afterwards to convince himself of its truth. Like
Right.
so that's not a rational process. That's something else. And so when we dismiss the something else, we're cutting ourselves off from a huge piece of the human potential, in my opinion. And so I think it's holding us back as a species, as a culture, as a civilization. And I think once we get over this resistance that comes because it doesn't fit into our current incomplete paradigm, we will be much better off. But you
Yeah.
know, people have to get over that emotional resistance. That the discomfort that maybe everything I've believed isn't exactly 100% correct. Maybe the map that I have of the territory isn't 100% complete and correct. I don't know why it's so threatening to people, but it really, really is. And
Yeah,
so,
and all throughout history, man has thought this is it. This is the pinnacle of our knowledge. Now we know everything there is to know.
I know.
And we look back 100 years now and we laugh, right? But
Yeah,
the patent office was going to close in like the 1930s because they said there's nothing else left to be invented.
right.
But we keep making the same mistake.
Yeah,
And even today we say, well, now we know it all. We know the origin of the universe. We know why man is, we know how we evolve. We know it all. And it's just it's humorous.
it's humorous, but the sad thing is like those whoever is not learning from history is doomed to repeat it, right? And that's why we keep repeating it.
Yeah.
When are we going to learn that it's not a hard thing that we have to accept. We're limited creatures. We have limited understanding. The state of our knowledge is incomplete. There's no shame in that. That there's
Right.
wonder in that. We should be excited about that. But people are just scared, so scared of the mystery that they'll just run into their paradigm and defend it like it's like some kind of like medieval castle or something. But
Yes, exactly. Yeah,
you know,
exactly. Well,
yeah,
Casey, thanks for doing this, man. It's good to see you.
it's lovely to meet you, man. Thank you so
Have a
much.
have a good
Oh,
afternoon.